The attic that was never Silenti grew up in a small town in the north of France, a place where everyone knew each other and time seemed to move just a little bit slower. Our house, where I lived with my parents, was built in the early 1900s. Thick stone walls, heavy wooden doors, and a narrow staircase leading up to a dusty old attic with creaking floorboards. Even when I was little, I had this strange sense that the attic was listening. Every time I opened the attic door, the air felt different, still but not cold, heavy somehow, and it was never, ever completely quiet. The attic always had a sound, day or night, whether it was windy or calm. There was always something. My mother used to say it was just mice, or maybe the wind sneaking through the wood. But that sound, it wasn't scratching or whistling. It was softer, stranger, almost like someone moving very carefully or whispering to themselves. The first time I really paid attention to it was during a winter storm when I was about 10. That night, the snow was thick and the power went out across the neighborhood. We sat around the fireplace with mugs of hot chocolate, the only light coming from candles flickering in the corners. My mum asked me to go grab some extra blankets from the attic. I didn't want to. I never liked going up there. But I didn't want to look childish either. So I went. The stairway to the attic was steep, and the only light came from the candle in my hand. It threw long, stretching shadows across the walls. The wooden steps groaned. With every move, when I opened the attic door, the cold air felt like it poured out to greet me. Step by step, I climbed. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. At the top of the stairs, I froze. From the far left corner of the attic, the darkest part, I heard a soft, scratching sound. It wasn't frantic, it was deliberate, like fingernails slowly brushing against wood. Then came a long breath. Not mine. Like someone standing there, holding their breath, waiting for me. I don't remember running back down, but I must have. My mother said it took her half an hour just to calm me down. My dad said I imagined it. There's nothing up there but dust and boxes, he insisted. It's just your mind playing tricks in the dark. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the older I got, the more I noticed things. Sometimes, while lying in bed, I'd hear footsteps overhead, right above my ceiling. At first, I told myself it was just the old wood settling, like everyone says old houses do. But it wasn't random creaks. There was rhythm to it. Pace, timing, like someone walking, pausing, walking again, I told my older sister. She laughed and called me paranoid. But one night, she came knocking on my door. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open, and all she whispered was, "Did you hear?" Singing. I remember that night. It was faint, barely there, but haunting, a melody, old and slow, no real words, just humming maybe. Soft, mournful, like a lullaby that someone forgot. We sat there in silence, listening, hearts pounding. After a minute or two, it stopped. Just like that, as if someone had realized we were listening. After that, my sister never teased me about the attic again. A few months later, my parents decided to clean out the attic for better storage. They pulled out old boxes, books, and dusty furniture. Then tucked away in the far corner, they found a wooden trunk with a rusted lock. My father managed to pry it open. Inside was an old dress, early 20th century style, and a worn leather-bound journal with crumbling edges. My mother carefully opened it. The handwriting was elegant, graceful, a little sad. It belonged to a woman named Elise. She had lived in the house around 1923. She wrote about her loneliness, about waiting for her fiancé to return from the war. He never came back. The entries became stranger as the pages went on. Elise wrote that she began to hear voices in the house, gentle whispers that comforted her at night. She said she could feel someone beside her when she cried. The last entry read, "If you cannot come back to me in life, then I shall remain here forever." After we found the trunk, the sounds in the attic became more frequent. One day, when I was home alone, I heard 3 knocks right above me. I looked up at the ceiling. Nothing. Then again, 3 more knocks. Louder, this time. Heavier. I ran outside and sat in the yard until my parents came home. Eventually, we invited the local priest to bless the house. He had heard all kinds of stories over the years, but seemed calm, even curious. He walked through the rooms, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. When he came down from the attic, I asked him, "Is there something up there?" He smiled gently and said, "There's nothing here that means you harm, but there is a soul that hasn't moved on." After that, things grew quieter. No more footsteps, no more singing, at least for a while. Still, every time I walked past the attic stairs, I felt a presence, not threatening, just watching, sad. Years later, when I moved to the city, my parents eventually sold the house. The new owners reached out once, just once. They asked if anything unusual had ever happened in the attic. They weren't sure, nothing obvious. But now and then, they heard someone humming at night. I smiled, and I told them, "It's just an old house, with a heart that never sleeps. Some souls choose not to leave, and some places are never truly silent." The woman in the white dress on the night bus. Have you ever believed in ghosts? I wasn't sure if I did until I experienced something that no logic or reason could explain. I drive a night bus, a route that takes me through quiet, country roads and small towns, often under the cover of darkness. The night rides aren't just about getting people from one place to another. They come with stories, moments that feel almost unreal. The night begins one rainy evening. The air was cold and damp. I was preparing for my night shift, driving from the city back to a small town over 100 kilometers away. The bus wasn't crowded, just a handful of familiar faces and a few strangers. As I opened the door to let passengers on, I noticed her, a woman standing by the roadside, wearing a long, flowing white dress. Her black hair hung loose over her shoulders, and her face carried a quiet sadness, like she was carrying the weight of the world. I called out to her. Without a word, she climbed aboard and quietly took a seat near the very back. The woman in white, as the bus rumbled along wet roads, the streetlights glinting off puddles, she sat silently, her gaze fixed somewhere far away outside the window. She didn't look at me or the other passengers. It was as if she was somewhere else entirely, lost in her own world. Every time I stopped to pick up another passenger, she remained still, never saying a word. That white dress, so pure and simple, fluttered softly in the breeze through the cracked window. I couldn't help but think of those ghost stories you hear about white ladies wandering country roads, waiting for something or someone. Strange encounters. I'd seen many unusual passengers before, but there was something different about her. She appeared only on rainy nights or when the fog rolled in thick. Sometimes she would sigh quietly, clutching a small white handkerchief, running her fingers over it like it meant everything to her. One night I tried talking to her. "Where are you headed this late?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. Instead, she gave me a sad smile, one that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories in her eyes. A mysterious passenger word around town was that many drivers on this route had spotted a woman dressed in white. Some said she was the spirit of a woman who had died in a car accident near a sharp bend in the road years ago. Someone still waiting for a ride home. I didn't want to believe it at first, but the more I drove those lonely roads, the more I realized there was something not quite right. The terrifying rainy night one night, the rain came down harder than ever. The bus was nearly empty except for her. The wind howled outside and the bus rocked slightly as I navigated the steep, winding roads. Suddenly the engine sputtered and the headlights flickered. I glanced back through the rearview mirror and she was gone, just like that. The last glance, I slammed on the brakes and pulled over to the side of the road. Heart pounding, I stepped outside and called out, "Are you okay? Where did you go?" Only the rain and wind answered. When I turned back to the bus, I found a soaked white handkerchief resting on the seat where she had been. It was the same handkerchief she'd held so gently before. That's when I felt it. She had left. The secret behind the white dress, I later discovered the story of a young woman who had died in an accident on that very road nearly 20 years ago. She had lived in a nearby village and was waiting to be picked up, to be taken home. Since then, drivers passing that bend at night claimed to see her ghostly figure. A woman in white, waiting, sometimes catching a ride, only to disappear without a trace. A fateful ride. Looking back, I realized her silence wasn't meant to frighten anyone. Her eyes told a story of loneliness, of longing, and of release. Maybe she didn't want to scare me. Maybe she just wanted to be accompanied, to share a quiet journey and be heard, even if only for a little while. Nights I'll never forget. We all carry memories that never fade. For her, it was the journey she never completed. Waiting in the cold night for someone to come. For me, it became a lesson in compassion and understanding. Every night I drive that route, I hope to see her again, to share another quiet ride, soft and peaceful, like the breath of the night itself. The story doesn't end. Here I know you might find this hard to believe, but if you ever drive through a lonely road at night, under the steady fall of rain and the whisper of wind, keep an eye out for figures dressed in white. Maybe they're just waiting for a ride home. The story ends here, but the mystery remains. House with no one inside. I never believed in the supernatural, or at least I used to think I didn't. That was before that night. The night it rained. It happened during the rainy season in central Vietnam, back when I was still in university. That summer I was working as a freelance writer for a travel media company. My job was to explore lesser-known areas and write up travel pieces, budget-friendly, off-the-map experiences. Naturally, that meant cheap transport, simple food, and whatever accommodation I could find. I remember it clearly. That day, I had just wrapped up a visit to an old village perched on a misty hillside, about 20 kilometers from the main town. I was getting ready to head back when the rain came, sudden and heavy. A thick sheet of water that swallowed the road, blurred the world. Worse, I lost signal. My rental motorbike began sputtering. The steep road was too slippery to ride safely, and then, like something out of a dream or a warning, I saw a wooden sign half covered in moss. Mock Lan Guest House, budget rooms, hot water, free Wi-Fi. I didn't think much. Just relief, maybe. Rain in your eyes will dull your instincts. I turned into the narrow path. The lane leading to the guest house was stone-paved and old, framed by damp, leaning walls with moss creeping up their sides. The rain came down in sheets, and in that pale, muted light, the world felt like a washed-out watercolor painting. The house itself stood quietly behind two large trees. Its tiled roof was dark with age, the walls cracked and blotched, where the paint had long peeled. Wind chimes made of seashells clinked on the front door, spinning in the wind. I parked under the eaves and knocked on the wooden door. No response. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. The strange thing was, the lights inside were on. I could see a fire flickering in the hearth beyond the glass panels. Someone had to be home. I hesitated, then pushed on the door. It swung open easily. It wasn't locked. Inside it looked normal. Quiet, a little old-fashioned, but clean. A small lobby with wooden chairs, a porcelain teapot, and a dusty CRT television resting in the corner. The walls held faded paintings of countryside scenes, the kind you'd see in someone's grandmother's house, but not a soul in sight. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone here? I'd like to book a room for the night." Nothing. I glanced. At the guest book on the counter, the last signature was from 3 months ago. Every page after that, blank. A small chill crept up my neck. Still, the rain outside kept falling, loud and cold and endless. I told myself, it's fine, just one night. What's the worst that can happen? I chose a room on the second floor, second from the end of the hall. The door was already open. Lights on, bed sheets clean. Everything looked normal. But it didn't feel normal. When I sat on the bed and placed my hand on the blanket, it was warm. Still warm, like someone had just been there a few minutes ago, and the pillow, there was a very clear indentation, the shape of a head. I rushed back downstairs, suddenly uneasy. I decided to leave, but just as I reached the stairs, the power cut out, darkness fell over the entire house. I turned on my phone flashlight, sweeping it across the empty lobby. No movement, no sound, and then soft creaking above me. Creak, 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 footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps along the old wooden floorboards upstairs. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. I ran back to the room, slammed the door shut, locked it. I sat on the bed with the blanket clutched to my chest like a shield. The room was silent. My phone still had no signal. The time read 10 p.m. and then it started again. Footsteps, back and forth, just outside my door. Heavy, dragging, like someone was walking in wooden clogs, scraping slightly with each step. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the door creaking open and someone, or something, standing there, staring. Then, around 3 a.m. Silence. Morning came with thin sunlight breaking through the clouds. I shot out of bed as soon as light entered the room, threw on my backpack and bolted down the stairs. The lobby was exactly as before. Still empty, undisturbed. I walked to the door and pulled the handle. This time it opened easily. The rain had stopped. The sky was pale blue. My motorbike was still outside, soaked but untouched. I got on and rode away without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the town centre. Later that day, I told an old food vendor about the strange guest house I stayed in. He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "Moklang Guest House. That place has been closed for a year. Owner died suddenly. Folks say it's haunted. Every so often people say they see lights on at night, but no one ever answers the door." I didn't say another word. But from that day on, every time I hear the sound of rain tapping on an old tiled roof, I think of that night, the night I took shelter in a house that may no longer belong to the living. Have you ever stopped at a strange place during a storm? If you do, make sure someone is really there to welcome you, because if not, whoever greets you might not be human. The cassette tape from the past. I still remember the day that old cassette tape came into my life, just an ordinary object, worn and dusty, yet carrying a story that would haunt me forever. A chance. Discovery 1. Quiet summer afternoon, when the city was soaked in heavy heat. I found myself wandering through a local flea market on the outskirts, a place I often visited just to browse forgotten treasures. I loved rummaging through piles of old books, vinyl records, clocks, and yes, even cassette tapes, which no one seemed to use anymore. Among the clutter, I spotted a cassette tape, its plastic case yellowed and cracked, the tape inside warped from age. No label, no indication of what was recorded, just a plain white cassette, completely blank. I asked the vendor about it. He just shrugged and said some person had dropped it off ages ago and never came back for it. Something about it called to me. I decided to take it home. The mysterious tape back home, I dug out my old cassette player, the one my dad kept from when I was a kid. Amazingly, it still worked. I carefully popped the tape in and pressed play. At first, only static and crackling. Hiss came through the tiny speakers. Then a faint voice, soft, trembling and full of fear, began to emerge. A cry for help. The voice belonged to a little girl. Her words were broken, hurried, and desperate. "Someone, please help me. I don't want to be here. They're locking me, in the basement. Please." I stopped the tape, heart pounding. The plea was so raw, so real, it sent chills down my spine. Curiosity and unease mingled inside me. I pressed play again. She described being trapped in the basement of an old house, surrounded by shadows and echoing footsteps. She begged for rescue, spoke of loneliness, hunger, and fear. Her voice trembled, but there was an unmistakable strength. Beneath it, a will to survive. The search begins. I couldn't let it go. That night, I searched online for any clues. Keywords from her story, locations mentioned in the tape, any reports of missing children. After hours digging through old news articles and forums, I found something chilling. Decades ago, a young girl about her age disappeared near an abandoned house on the city's edge. Police had found a locked basement there once, with signs of confinement, but no trace of the girl. Her fate remained a mystery. Visiting the house the next day, I went to see the house. The late afternoon sun filtered through thick trees, casting long, eerie shadows. The house stood silent and decayed, cracked walls, broken windows, and a basement door firmly locked. A heavy, oppressive silence surrounded it. Peering through the cracks, I felt as though unseen eyes watched me. Was it real, or just my imagination? Voices from below. That night I camped in my car nearby, cassette player in hand. When the city fell silent, I heard it again. The tape crackled to life on its own. The girl's voice was clearer now. Don't let them find me. They're coming. I shivered. Fear and curiosity wrestled inside me. I had to go back. This time, to open that basement door. Unlocking secrets, I found an old key hidden under the stairs. Hand shaking, I turned it in the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty basement. The air was thick with dampness and decay. Using my flashlight, I saw scratches on the walls and rusted objects strewn about. In a corner lay a small wooden box, nearly rotted through. Inside was a faded diary and some old photographs. The girl's diary. The handwriting was neat but small, filled with fear and hope. She wrote of days trapped in darkness, craving freedom, naming the people who held her captive. Each page tightened a knot in my chest, bridging past and present. Back home, I played the tape again. This time, her voice was calm, almost peaceful. Thank you for coming to me. I'm not alone anymore. I sat in silence, tears streaming down my face. From a forgotten cassette tape, a lost girl's story had returned. Finally heard, finally free. An ending and a beginning. That tape wasn't just an old relic. It was a bridge between then and now, between life and restless spirits. I'll never forget the sound of that fragile voice, filled with pain, hope, and strength. I honestly don't know how to start this story. It's one of those strange things that sits somewhere between reality and a dream. Something you can't explain, but you also can't just ignore. It all began one late autumn afternoon when I went back to my childhood home to help my mum clean up. I don't get back there often. Living in the city makes it tough. But whenever I do, it feels like stepping into a different world. The house was old, tucked under the shade of a giant old banyan tree, with leaves rustling outside, slowly turning. golden brown in the fall wind. While tidying up, I found an old family photo tucked away in a dusty drawer. The frame was dark wood, cracked in some places from age. The photo showed 3 generations of my family. My grandmother was standing on the left, smiling gently. My grandfather sat in the middle, his eyes warm and kind, looking straight at the camera. And my mum, small and young, stood on the right, holding a flower in her hand. I was right there too, standing in front of them all, a little kid wearing a bright red jacket, but what caught my eye, and honestly made me pause, was a man dressed entirely in black, standing just behind my mum. His face was half in shadow, but his stern expression and deep eyes were unmistakable. I never knew who he was, and I'd never heard a single word about him growing up. At first, I thought maybe it was just a mistake. Someone walking past, accidentally, caught in the picture. But no one ever mentioned this man, not my mum, not my grandmother, no one. Curiosity gnawed at me. I brought the photo to my mum. She stared at it quietly, then sighed. "That man, he's a stranger," she said softly. My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, Mom?" She hesitated, then told me a story I'd never heard before. When I was little, there was a distant relative, a cousin, they said. He never came around much and always wore black. Nobody really knew him well. Sometimes people saw him wandering around the house late at night, but no one talked about him openly. She paused. He died under mysterious circumstances right before that photo was taken. That night, I kept staring at the photo. The man's eyes felt like they were following me, pulling me into some dark secret. I started dreaming of him. In my dreams, I walked down a long, dim hallway. At the end, faint light glimmered, and the man stood there, his back turned. Every time I got closer, he would slowly walk deeper into the shadows. The dreams repeated night after night, each time a little different, as if trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. One night I woke up to a soft, drawn-out sigh in the dark. I flicked on the light. The room was empty, except the photo lay on the table, the man's face almost glowing under the warm light. I was scared, but also strangely drawn to it. Determined to find out more, I posted the photo on a family group chat, asking if anyone could identify the man. A distant cousin replied with a chilling explanation. He said the man was the black cousin who had died in a car accident over 50 years ago at the age of 25. Apparently, he led a secretive life and was rarely seen by anyone in the family. Rumors spread that he had been accused of something no one could prove, then disappeared for a while before his death. Why was he in the photo then? And why was he standing so close to my mom, like a shadow that wouldn't leave? I went back to my grandmother's house to ask her directly. She was old and frail, but still sharp. I showed her the photo. She looked at it quietly for a long time. "Oh, yes," she said hoarsely. "He's the one no one talks about. It's an old, painful story." I pressed her gently. "Grandma, can you tell me what happened?" After a long pause, she spoke softly. He was family, but with many troubles. He died young, but not just from the accident. He carried secrets, things the family wanted to forget. That's why no one speaks of him. But he's still here, in the walls, in the memories. She carefully put the photo away. Back in the city, the unanswered questions haunted me. Sometimes I'd feel someone watching me, not physically, but in a way that made my skin crawl. Footsteps echoed in empty rooms. Whispers brushed past my ears like wind. Was the man in the photo still here, watching me, or was it just an echo of the past, a restless spirit trapped between memories and silence, the story of the stranger in... The family photo remains unfinished, but I've learned something. There are things in life we may never fully understand. Things that linger quietly, waiting to be seen, heard, remembered. If you ever find an old family photo, take a good look. You might just see a face that wasn't meant to be there. A story no one told. Or a ghost who's been waiting for you to notice. If you want, I can share more about the nights I lived with the stranger, the signs I couldn't ignore, and my journey to uncover the truth behind that photo. Would you like to hear more? The door that never opens. I still remember the very first day I stepped into that small rented room, tucked inside an old house in the heart of the city's oldest neighborhood. The kind of place where just opening a window lets in the distant hum of traffic mixed with the occasional chirp of birds. The room itself wasn't new, but it was tidy and clean. The rent was affordable for a fresh graduate like me. Everything seemed normal at first, until I noticed something strange. Day 1 in the new place. The house had 3 floors, with only a handful of small rooms on each level. I was assigned a room on the 2nd floor, near the end of a narrow hallway. The door to my room opened into a dim corridor, where natural light barely reached. The yellowish glow of old bulbs flickered overhead. What caught my attention the most was an old wooden door just a few steps from my room, always shut tight, never opening. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was just a storage closet or a room the landlord wasn't renting out for some reason. But a few days later, I started hearing strange noises coming from behind that door. Whispering in the night. The first time I heard the whispering was on a chilly, early winter night. I was sitting on my bed, reading, when soft voices drifted through the silence. Faint, indecipherable whispers. I looked toward the door, a shiver running down my spine. I was sure I wasn't imagining it. The whispers came and went irregularly, sometimes quick and urgent, sometimes barely audible, like someone trying to hide a secret. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it might be the wind slipping through cracks or neighbors talking softly nearby. But no, night after night, when everything fell silent, the whispering returned, and it got clearer. Quiet footsteps. Another night, just as I was about to sleep, I heard slow, soft footsteps pacing near that mysterious door. I got up, pressed my ear to the wood, trying to hear better. The footsteps were close, just a few feet away, but whenever I looked out into the hallway, no one was there. I called out, "Is someone there?" But only silence answered. My heart pounded faster. Fear, mixed with curiosity, pulled me toward uncovering the truth. The locked door, I started thinking about opening that door. But it was locked tight. No key inside my room. When I asked the landlord, an old lady living on the ground floor, she said it was the door that never opens, warning me not to try. I didn't understand why, but somehow that warning only made me want to know more. Strange signs. Day by day, I felt something strange about the house. At midnight, the air around my room grew colder, heavier, like someone was standing just behind me. Once I caught a glimpse of a white shadow moving down the hallway near the locked door. I told a friend about it, and he said maybe I was haunted. I had never believed in ghosts until things got too weird to explain. A sigh, filled with sadness. That night, lying in bed, I heard a long, sorrowful sigh coming from behind the door. It chilled me to the bone, making my chest tighten. I didn't dare look directly at the door, just listen to the slow, heavy breathing. Tired, broken. I flicked on my lamp, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the dim light couldn't chase away the heavy cold. The strange dream. The next night, I dreamt of a woman in a white dress standing behind the door, her face filled with sorrow. She tried to open it, but couldn't. I reached out to help, but my hands felt heavy, unable to touch the handle. She looked back at me with hollow, tired eyes, then vanished just as I woke up. Since then, I felt strangely connected to that door. Digging into the past, I decided to ask the landlord about the house's history. She told me it used to belong to a wealthy family, but tragedy struck. The youngest daughter died young. They said she was often locked away in a secret room, and the locked door might be the entrance. The landlord muttered that since the girl's death, no one dared open that door. The painful truth, one day I was allowed to go to the attic, where old belongings were stored. I found some handwritten letters and a diary. The girl's. Her words were filled with loneliness and longing for freedom. It became clear she was imprisoned by her own family for some dark secret. The decision to open. After many sleepless nights, I decided to unlock the door that never opened. I borrowed the key from the landlord and prepared myself to face whatever waited inside. When I turned the key, the door creaked open, revealing a dusty, dark space, smelling of forgotten years. I stepped inside and saw a small, cold room, walls covered with childish drawings scratched into the paint. Meeting the shadow, suddenly a cold breeze swept through, flickering the weak bulb. I heard a soft, sorrowful breath. From the darkness, a faint, ghostly figure appeared. It was the woman from my dream, sad but hopeful. I felt her silent message. At last, someone listens. Peace at last. After that night, the strange noises stopped. The door lost its icy chill as if a heavy burden was lifted. I don't know if she found peace, but I believe she did, and I learned that some secrets, no matter how frightening, deserve to be uncovered. A night at the forgotten cemetery. I still remember clearly the feeling that washed over me the very first time I stepped foot into that cemetery. A place everyone in our small town referred to with a name both familiar and haunting. The Forgotten Cemetery. It wasn't a grand, official cemetery. No towering gates or pristine headstones. Instead, it lay deep within an ancient forest with graves covered in thick moss, worn and cracked tombstones that time had nearly erased, broken angel statues, some missing heads, scattered like shattered memories from a long-forgotten past. The unexpected invitation. It all began on a chilly, late autumn evening when my group of friends, 5 of us in total, were trying to figure out what to do for the weekend. Nam, one of the group and a big fan of anything mysterious or creepy, suggested we spend a night at the forgotten cemetery. His reasoning was simple. We've done all the usual fun stuff. This time, let's do something memorable, something different. I, someone sensitive to the supernatural, felt a shiver run down my spine, but curiosity and not wanting to seem like a scaredy cat pushed me to agree. Into the night we gathered, as dusk fell, bringing along flashlights, some food, and an old tape recorder. Nam even brought a book of chants, saying, just in case we need it. We all laughed it off, but no one objected. As we walked deeper into the forest, the sound of dry leaves crunching beneath our feet and the whispering wind through ancient branches created an eerie yet strangely beautiful atmosphere. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating just enough to see the narrow path winding forward. The cold air crept into our clothes, making us shiver. Entering the cemetery, once we reached the cemetery, a heavy silence settled around us. No chirping birds, no buzzing insects, just the wind sweeping through gnarled trees. We placed our flashlights carefully around the largest grave, forming a small circle of dim light. Nam opened his chant book and read a few lines in a low, deliberate voice, as if calling out to someone unseen. We sat quietly beneath an ancient tree, listening to the rustling leaves. Strange signs, as midnight passed, things started to feel different. Huang, usually the jokester of the group, suddenly went quiet, her eyes wide open, staring at a notebook she was holding. She didn't say a word, but kept flipping pages. Curious, I asked what she was writing. She just shook her head, looking pale, and said, "I don't know. These words just come to me." Then my flashlight flickered, going out, and back on like it was alive. I felt something watching us from the shadows beyond the light's reach. My heart pounded, breath quickening. The mysterious notebook. As dawn neared, Huang showed me what she had written. Strange names and dates, many unfamiliar, some vaguely connected to my family's old stories, but most completely unknown. Like echoes from another world, maybe some spirits want to talk to us, Nam said, his eyes wide, fixed on nothing in particular. I didn't laugh. A cold wave ran down my spine. I could feel a presence, something very real and very close. Whispering voices in the dark. About an hour before we decided to leave, I heard something unusual. Soft whispers, like someone calling my name from far away in the woods. I looked back at my friends. They heard it too. We all fell silent, holding our breath to listen better. The whispers lasted a few minutes before fading away like mist. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or some restless soul trying to reach out, but the chill stayed with me long after. The strange dream, that night I barely slept. The whispers and mysterious names haunted my mind. In my dream, a small child in old-fashioned clothes ran among the gravestones, eyes filled with sadness. The child held a notebook identical to Huang's and showed me the strange symbols written inside. Not words, but meanings I somehow understood. It was a message, a story untold from the souls resting beneath the earth. Aftermath. When we returned to normal life, something had shifted inside each of us. Huang still keeps the notebook and occasionally reads those cryptic lines. I often find myself revisiting moments from that night. The cold silence, the flickering lights, the whispers. The story of the forgotten cemetery is like a vivid painting in my memory, colored with mystery, shadows and whispers from the past. Final thoughts. Maybe what we experienced was a blend of imagination and the unique atmosphere of the cemetery. But I believe deep down, some spirits are truly there, waiting for someone to listen, even if only for a moment. A night at the forgotten cemetery was more than just an adventure. It was a journey into peace, hidden within the darkness of history. Apartment 302 that was never rented. 1. Moving into the old complex. Still remember the day I moved into that old apartment building on the edge of town. It was quiet, a little run-down, but the rent was affordable. Exactly what I needed at the time. My unit was 405 on the 4th floor, right across from apartment 302. On that first day, I was excited to start fresh. I carried my suitcase down the long, dim hallway. The flickering fluorescent lights hummed faintly above me, casting uneven shadows on the cracked walls. I told myself this was the beginning of something new. But something caught my attention right away. Not my own apartment, but number 302, directly across from mine. No matter the time of day or night, that apartment's light was always on. It never went dark. And yet, strangely, no one ever came or went from there. Curious, I asked the building's security guard about it. He told me that apartment 302 had been vacant for years after a mysterious disappearance. The last tenant had vanished without a trace, leaving behind unanswered questions. From that moment on, I found myself paying more attention. Part 2. Strange. Noises and the never-ending light evenings were the hardest. After work, I'd settle into my apartment, enjoying the quiet. But from 302 I started hearing odd noises, soft footsteps echoing in the hallway, the faint sound of a door opening and closing. Sometimes whispers floated through the thin walls, but I could never make out what was being said. I wondered, was someone really there? Or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me? One night, just as I was about to fall asleep, the light from 302 suddenly flickered off, then snapped back on as if someone was deliberately flashing it. My heart raced. I froze, listening intently, too scared to move. Part 3. Strange dreams and ominous signs. Night after night my sleep became restless. I dreamed of walking into apartment 302, a dark, cold space covered in dust and clutter. In the corner stood a shadowy figure, back turned toward me. I called out, but there was no answer. I woke up drenched in sweat, convincing myself it was just a dream. But the unease stayed with me. Then one night, at exactly 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by knocking on my door. My heart pounded as the knocking grew louder and more urgent. I suddenly remembered the knock seemed to come from 302's direction. Part 4. A chill in the hallway, summoning every ounce of courage. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The air was icy cold, and a faint wind swept through the cracks, sending chills down my spine. I pressed my ear to apartment 302's door. Silence. I knocked several times. No answer. Then, without warning, the window of 302 slowly creaked open. A cold breeze brushed past me, carrying a musty, damp smell, and something else I couldn't quite place. I hesitated. Should I go in? Part 5. Stepping into darkness. Heart pounding, I turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The room was dark, thick with dust. Everything was coated in grime. The floor, the furniture, the walls. I flicked on the flashlight, revealing a peeling painting of a man's faded face hanging crookedly on the wall. I moved carefully, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching me. Suddenly footsteps echoed behind me, but when I turned around, nothing. A sudden gust slammed the window shut. I jumped, and without looking back, I hurried out. Part 6. Digging into the past. The next morning, I was determined to learn more about the apartment's history. Neighbors and the security guard told me that apartment 302 had belonged to a man named Min, a middle-aged office worker who lived alone. One day, Min disappeared without a trace. No one knew why, and no clues were ever found. After that, the apartment was left vacant, but the strange lights and noises kept the building's residents away. Part 7. Seeing a ghostly figure. But one night, while sitting by my window, I saw a man standing in 302's window. He wore a white shirt and had a blurry, sorrowful face, staring out as if lost in thought. I couldn't hold the gaze for long, but his image stayed with me. From then on, my dreams were filled with visions of Min standing silently in the hallway, eyes pleading for help. Part 8. Untold stories. I asked an elderly neighbor about Min. She said he was a quiet man, often alone, rarely speaking to anyone. Sometimes she heard him talking, but there was no one else there. Rumor had it he suffered from severe depression, and one day simply vanished. Part 9. The final message. One night I dreamt Min spoke to me softly. "Help me." When I woke up, there was a small piece of paper on my table, one I hadn't noticed before. Written on it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "I don't want to be forgotten." That message weighed heavily on me. I decided then that I had to help him find peace. Part 10. An open ending. I began searching for answers, piecing together Min's story. Though I never fully uncovered the truth, the strange lights and noises in apartment 302 gradually faded. The lights stopped burning through the night. I believe Min sent his final message, hoping to be heard. And I will never forget apartment 302, a lonely spirit's refuge, longing for someone to listen. The white-eyed doll in the glass cabinet. I still remember the day my family brought that doll home. An old porcelain doll, carefully wrapped inside a wooden box, covered with a foggy glass lid. It had a strange kind of beauty, but also something unsettling about it. Its eyes were milky white, not the usual brown or black you'd expect. They looked like two frozen crystals staring straight into your soul. Back then, I was about 8 years old. I didn't understand why my parents would buy such a doll. It wasn't colourful or cute like the toys my classmates had. But they said it was a valuable antique and needed to be displayed in a glass cabinet to keep it safe. The first day the doll came home, everything seemed normal. It sat proudly in the corner of our living room, inside the glass cabinet, where the sunlight would gently pour in through the window and cast long shadows on the wall. I stared at it many times, noticing how it just stood there, motionless, but its white eyes seemed to follow my every move. I was afraid to touch it. Something about those eyes made me uneasy, like there was someone trapped inside. The first night, soft, eerie laughter. That very first night after the doll arrived, I heard something strange. At first, I thought it was the wind rustling the window, but the sound wasn't the wind. It was a soft, giggling laugh. Quiet, but not like an adult's laugh, more like a child's. I closed my eyes tight, trying to ignore it, but the giggling came again, clearer this time, coming from the direction of the glass cabinet. My heart was pounding so hard I was scared to open my eyes. I hugged my blanket tightly and told myself it was just my imagination. The next morning, I asked my parents, "Did you hear any laughter last night?" They just smiled and said, "I must have been dreaming." The days after, things got stranger. Every morning when I woke up, the doll wasn't where it had been the night before. At first, it sat on the right side of the cabinet. The next morning, it was lying sideways on the left. I was sure I hadn't touched it. I was too scared, and no one else in the house seemed to move it. My parents were busy, and my little sister was scared of the doll. I started keeping a journal to track the doll's position each day, but it seemed to move on its own at night. Its milky eyes, always watching me, gave me chills every time I looked at it. On the 7th day, my little sister starts talking to a friend named Lena. My little sister, only 4 years old, began acting strange. She talked to herself more and more, laughing and chatting with someone no one else could see. Then she started calling out, "Lena," over and over, her innocent voice sounding sweet, but somehow eerie to me and my parents. "Who's Lena?" I asked her. She didn't answer clearly, only said, "Lena is my friend. Lena lives inside the glass cabinet." I looked over at the doll. Digging into the truth about Lena, curious and a little scared, I decided to find out more about the doll's history. My parents said it was bought at an antique museum, but no details. I searched online and found an old story about a girl named Lena who died about 80 years ago in a house fire near where we live now. Lena was the only daughter of a wealthy family. She loved playing with dolls, especially a porcelain doll with white eyes, just like the one we had. The strange things became clearer from then on. Things made more sense. My sister kept talking about Lena, saying she was sad because she couldn't leave her old house. One night when the whole family was asleep, I heard soft footsteps in the living room. I quietly went to check and saw the faint outline of a little girl standing by the glass cabinet. The dim light showed her pure white dress and clear face, but her eyes were the same milky white as the doll's. She turned to look at me, smiled gently, then slowly faded away like mist. A strange but comforting feeling. Gradually, I stopped, feeling scared. Lena wasn't here to hurt anyone. Instead, my sister and Lena seemed connected in some invisible way, like two close friends. Every night, the soft laughter still echoed, but it no longer frightened me. It felt like a quiet reminder that Lena was still here, still wanting to be remembered. Is this the end, or just the beginning? To this day, the doll remains in the glass cabinet. My sister has grown up and no longer talks to Lena, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that soft, gentle laughter. I wonder if it's a greeting or a message from the other side. One last thought. If you ever come across a doll with milky white eyes, don't be afraid. Maybe, just maybe, it's a little friend like Lena, waiting for someone to listen, to love, and to never feel alone. The endless hallway. I work as a night security guard at an old high school, one of those places with over 100 years of history. My shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and most nights it's just me walking the halls, checking locked doors, switching off lights and sometimes tidying up. But there's one strange thing that I just can't explain, no matter how many nights I've spent here. On my first night, I was excited but a little nervous. Everyone at work warned me about this place, saying it was haunted, but I never really believed in any of that. After I'd checked all the classrooms in the main building, I headed down the east wing, a quieter part of the school, rarely used. Hallway stretched out before me, long and narrow, the walls faded and chipped, and heavy wooden doors lined both sides. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, casting a dull glow. I walked slowly, eyes scanning the hallway. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but then I realized the hallway didn't seem to end. I kept walking and walking. 30 minutes passed, maybe more, and I still hadn't reached the end. I stopped and looked behind me. Same endless hallway, stretching as far as I could see. A maze that doesn't end. I started to feel uneasy. I tried to turn back, to head to the door where I'd started, but something was off. The room numbers on the right side, 12, 13, 14, were gone. Instead, there were rooms labelled 33, 44, 57. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was imagining things. I reached out and touched the door to room 33. It was old and worn, and when I pushed it open, the room was empty, dark, and smelled like mold. I shrugged, thinking maybe it was part of a wing I'd never been in before. Maybe they'd added on something new and I just didn't know. The flickering lights. I walked on. Suddenly the lights overhead flickered, bright, then dark, then bright again. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence, like the hallway itself was breathing. A cold draft slipped through cracks in the window frames. I stopped dead in my tracks, feeling like someone was watching me from the far end of the hallway. I spun around, but there was nothing, just shadows. The mysterious door, then I saw it. A door unlike the others. Heavy dark wood polished to a shine, with a brass doorknob carved with intricate patterns, something you wouldn't expect to find in an old school. A small brass plaque hung above the knob. Faint, worn letters read laboratory. I knew there was no lab here. I reached for the knob, heart pounding, opening the door. The door creaked open slowly. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a dusty old desk lamp. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old paper. Stacks of books and scientific equipment lay scattered everywhere. On the wall hung a faded watercolor painting of students in vintage uniforms. Chill ran down my spine. A strange feeling. Stepped inside. I felt like someone was standing right behind me. I turned quickly. No one. I reached out and touched the painting. It was icy cold under my fingertips. Then I heard it. Whispers. Barely audible. Come back. The lamp flickered dangerously. I slammed the door shut and hurried back into the hallway. No way out, but when I turned around, the door was gone. The room numbers were back to 12, 13, 14. Panic crept in. I rushed toward what I thought was the end of the hallway. But this hallway wasn't the same anymore. It stretched on, twisting and turning like a maze. I felt trapped. I pulled out my phone and switched on the flashlight. The light cut through the darkness, casting weird shadows on the cracked walls. I quickened my pace, desperate to escape. Footsteps behind me. Then I heard footsteps, not mine, soft, steady steps echoing just behind me. I spun around. Empty hallway. The footsteps followed. My heart pounded. As I broke into a run, the door to freedom, after what felt like forever. A large door appeared. I lunged forward, pushed it open, and stepped through. Back to reality. I was back in the familiar hallway, the one I started from. Relieved, I took a deep breath, but here's the strangest part. My watch said over an hour had passed, but by the school's clocks only 10 minutes had gone by. I shook my head. Nothing made sense. Nights after that, I couldn't shake the feeling. I came back every night, hoping to understand. But every time, the hallway changed. Sometimes it stretched forever. Sometimes it narrowed like a secret passage. The laboratory door appeared and disappeared. It felt like something was waiting for me. The unsolved mystery. I dug into the school's history. Years ago, a science teacher vanished mysteriously. They say he was obsessed with parallel dimensions and time portals. The lab must have been his workspace. Some say he's still there in another dimension. Closing thoughts. I still work here, walking that endless hallway every night. Some things can't be explained. Maybe someday I'll walk through that door again, and this time I won't come back. And if you ever find yourself walking down a hallway that never ends, be careful. Because sometimes a door opens to a world you're not ready to face.